Our next story is brought to you by NordVPN. Help secure your web traffic and protect you from snoops, spies, and anyone else from stealing or monetizing your data. All for 75% off at nordvpn.com/TYT. Use the code TYT and get a free month now.
Today is a peak moment of lunacy, both at the Fed and on Capitol Hill with this budget bill.
That's former Republican Congressman David Stockman sharing his perspective on the Federal Reserve's decision to lower interest rates. They lowered the interest rate by 0.25%, and this will actually have some significant ramifications based on experts. Now, I want to be clear, that was a former Republican congressman. And I've been watching some of his commentary about the economy for some time now. And he, in my opinion, is right on the money. He's saying the things that spineless Republicans in Congress refuse to say. Trump and the Federal Reserve, under Trump's leadership, pressuring and bullying, are setting up this country for a giant recession. In fact, Stockman has more on that. Let's take a look.
They think they could get away with this kind of debt building year after year in these massive amounts because it doesn't cost much, because the Fed is keeping interest rates so sub-economically, artificially low that it's put the politicians to sleep. And it's done the same thing in the C-suites of corporate America. They're borrowing hand over fist, but not to create jobs or new capacity or new efficiencies, but to buy back their stock and do, ridiculous M&A deals. So we're burying the country in debt, 72 trillion, public and private. That's what the Fed has done. It's enabling the politicians to, go on this kind of debt-fueled lark, and it's not helping the Main Street economy.
So there's two different issues here. One is the Republican hypocrisy that has never been resolved. They give away so much in tax cuts under Reagan, George W. Bush, and now Trump, that it can't possibly be paid for in spending cuts. Even if you cut the government to the bone and you said, hey, you know what, Social Security and Medicare, we lied to you guys. We took your taxes all that time and now we're cutting it drastically. Even then you couldn't pay for all the tax cuts for the rich, right? So they never resolved that in the Republican Party, and it was always a lie. So their policy was never to balance the budget, and that's why Republican presidents never do. And yet, a lot of the media goes along with that mythology. Oh, Republicans are for balanced budgets. Really, which one? The last Republican president to leave office with a balanced budget was Dwight Eisenhower. So Stockman has been actually fair and consistent on that for a long time. So you just have to make up your mind. Is your priority tax cuts for the rich, or is it balancing the budget? And the jury's in on that for what the Republican priorities are. Now there's a second problem, which is specific to Trump. These tax cuts have overheated the market. It's created this giant bubble. And in that bubble, you have what? Inflated prices because of the stock buybacks. So the companies buy back their own stocks, which increases their value artificially without actually producing anything more or investing in themselves. In fact, one of the reasons the Fed cut the rate is they said, we're worried that the companies are not investing in themselves. And that does not bode well for the future. So later they will look back at this and go, oh, we should have known. This was a classic bubble. I mean, it doesn't get any more classic than this. But as we're in the middle of it, everybody's going along except a few brave guys like Stockman, who's a Republican, calling up the bubble and going, it's gonna pop. It's definitely gonna pop.
Yes, in fact, one of the interviews he had, and this is prior to the Fed's decision to lower interest rates, was when he cautioned about this pressure to have consumers borrow, right? So the idea is lower interest rates, wages are stagnant, we all know that, and inflation continues to go up. By the way, lowering interest rates allows inflation to continue to go up, so that's an issue. But he said, look, the idea behind lowering interest rates is let's have the consumers continue borrowing more, but they can't borrow more. So he mentions, and I'm glad that there's someone talking about this on places like CNBC. He specifically mentions that consumers are at peak debt. They can't take out any more debt. So you have record debt right now, coupled with stagnant wages. And he's right, the real economy is in a lot of trouble. He's also right about one other thing, this.
Trump is out to lunch. He's an economic ignoramus on monetary policy.
Exactly, and he also talks a little bit about how, look, Trump has his own interests in lowering the interest rates, right? Because he's got a lot of debt, a lot of adjustable rate debt. And so,
oh, that's interesting.
Yes, and I'm not just saying that, okay? This is something that's been reported on. In fact, let's go to this next video. It talks about it in a little more detail.
President says he's paying interest rates.
Well, you know what? He's actually quite accurate about that. There have been reports that the Trump organization has about $340 million in adjustable rate debt. So might be one reason why he's paying more if rates are going up. But they've been coming down. And there's some cognitive dissonance here, guys, because when you look at what he says, it's the strongest economy in history, so we should have lower interest rates. That's not historically the way policy has worked.
He is bullying Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates, not for the US economy. He doesn't care about us. He cares about himself. He's been using the office of the presidency to benefit himself financially since the very beginning. And even after Powell lowered interest rates, he still complained about it because he didn't think it was enough. Here's what he tweeted. What the market wanted to hear from Jerome Powell, and the Federal Reserve.
That's not his, I thought it was J period. No, he wrote J, that's not his name.
He's an idiot,
He really is an idiot.
Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve is that this was the beginning of a lengthy and aggressive rate cutting cycle, which would keep pace with China, the European Union, and other countries around the world. As usual, Powell let us down, but at least he is ending quantitative tightening, which shouldn't have started in the first place. No inflation. First of all, there has been inflation, there's no question about it. And one other thing, this discourages people from saving because you're not earning any interest on your savings account. It encourages people to take out more debt and discourages them from saving because they're not earning anything in their money or from their money.
Okay, two more things about that. One is, look, if you're not familiar with all this quantitative reasoning and the financial situation, I don't blame you. So just make it real simple, right? So when the economy is doing well, you don't cut interest rates. You usually increase interest rates because you're worried about inflation running out of control. That would create a different problem because theoretically you have more jobs, and since you have that, there's more competition for jobs and wages go up, and then the products prices start to go up, and so you wouldn't cut interest rates when the economy is doing well because you might overheat the economy. Now, when you already have a bubble and you already have peak debt, not only at the personal level but at the corporate level, that is the very worst time to cut interest rates. So every economist knows this, and then you see people on CNBC, et cetera, snickering about it. And by the way, if you go to the CNBC website, they do, to be fair to them, they have economists after economists almost daily warning, it's gonna blow, and so what they're playing with fire here, and a great homework on, I had forgotten that he had money where he of course has debt. That makes a lot of sense. So it is actually somewhat a personal corruption on Donald Trump's part when he wants to pay lower interest rates on his own debt, et cetera. But then that leads to the final thing, which is about what the Republicans do in general that is not specific to Trump. They've been doing this since Nixon, and people have written books about it. When they're in charge, they try to pressure the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates so that the economy will heat up and it will seem like they have a good economy. And they load up debt because again, you're spending into the economy, which then creates a better economy. And as soon as a Democrat comes into office, they go, oh my God, look at the debt. You got to get rid of the debt and the deficit, oh my God. And Federal Reserve, you better lower those interest rates. And the idiot Democrats usually go along to get pressure. And they're like, oh my God, oh no, okay, the Republicans are gonna yell at me. You morons, they've written books about it, right? And they fall into that trap almost every time. And so they do that. And when you increase the rates or you try to get rid of the deficit, then you take money out of the economy and the economy does worse. And then the Republicans turn around and go, you see that, you can't have a Democrat in office. You can't have one because the economy does so poorly. Now, as it turns out, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, to be fair to them, I've got plenty of progressive critique of them, but they were good stewards of the economy, and the economy did boom in the long run in their presidency. And as you know, with George W. Bush, oftentimes with the Republicans, no matter how many games they play, they get caught, especially if Bush if he'd only had one term, the things that he set into motion would have exploded anyway, right? Then they would have blamed it on Democrats. But he had 2 terms, so he blew up before he could get out of office. And probably the same thing will happen with Trump. It'll probably blow up on his own term, even if it's just 1 term. But if he goes 2 terms, there's no way the economy doesn't crash.
Oh, yeah.
Impossible. Well, hey, you made it this far. You must really like the Young Turks. Thank you. We really appreciate you. Now, another easy way to keep supporting us also helps keep your internet activities and data private, all with a push of the NordVPN app. Head to nordvpn.com/TYT right now for 75% off of your next 3 years.